This is my celebration mic, everybody. This is We're celebrating today with Aaron Maté. If you know Aaron Maté, friend of the show, he is a writer for The Nation magazine, and he's been leading. He's been out in front of the curve on the RussiaGate. Aaron Maté, bring him up. Let's see him. Can we see him? There he is. Hi, Aaron. How are you?
Hey, Jimmy.
Now, how annoying do you find my celebration mic?
It was pretty annoying. I'm not going to miss it. That's the last I've heard of it.
All right, now, now let's go through this. I don't even want to get your overview yet. Or go ahead, take some time. Now, how have you been reacting to the latest news that Mueller has finished his investigation and handed his report off to the Attorney General?
Right. Okay. So until we see the actual report or even get a glimpse at a summary of its findings, which should be any day now, we can't draw like 100% conclusions. But I think we can strongly expect that this is the complete collapse of the RussiaGate conspiracy theory that you and I have been pushing back on for 2 years now. The fact is, and this is a point that needs to be tirelessly made, after hearing so long about Mueller, and Mueller was going to indict Trump, he was going to indict Trump Jr., he was going to indict all of Trump's associates on this grand conspiracy with Russia. The grand result is we have zero indictments pertaining to a Trump-Russia conspiracy, and all the evidence we have so far from the indictments we have undermines the prospect or the chances of there ever being a Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. So it's a huge blow to that. There's also another significant thing worth noting here, which is that, I mean, one could argue that, and we're hearing it already, that perhaps collusion is something that Mueller couldn't indict. But the fact is also, what Mueller also didn't indict anybody on is any perjury charges that could have been used to cover up any Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. So, all the key pillars, like the Trump Tower meeting, where Don Jr. met with some Russians, and a publicist told Don Jr. that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton. Don Jr. was not indicted for lying to Congress, and Don Jr. told Congress what that meeting was about, which, in his telling has nothing to do with any kind of conspiracy theory. So no indictment for that. So although we can't draw like 100% conclusions yet, we can learn a lot from the way that this Mueller probe has concluded.
Okay, so so even though we don't know the contents of the report yet, the reason why we can draw this conclusion is because if there really was a criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and the Russians to throw an election, there would be more people involved besides just Trump, right? So there would have to be, you would think, at least one other person that would be indicted, right? So since no one else is being indicted, it points to the fact that there isn't a conspiracy. And so we're going to, because I'm going to play you some video, is what they've been saying on CNN and MSNBC is, oh no, they could still be laying out the deal. Let's remember, you can't indict a sitting president. So what he could be doing is laying out the case for impeachment, and then it's up to that's such a bullshit assessment of this. And they're comparing it to Nixon, and they're saying, well, Nixon wasn't indicted, and we all know he obstructed justice. And it's like, yeah, but do you understand? They're so disingenuous. They're still doing it, right? That's a disingenuous thing to argue that it's like Nixon, because it's not, right?
I mean, the whole thing for 2 years has been disingenuous by ignoring all the evidence that contradicts the bold conclusions of a conspiracy that people like the pundits on MSNBC and CNN were drawing. So it's no surprise that right now, in the face of Mueller returning zero indictments for the conspiracy that we've heard endlessly about for 2 years, it's no surprise that these same people are doubling down with a new deflection and a new way to mislead their unfortunate audiences.
So let's have some fun. Here's, people have told me, and people have told me that I have anger issues, but I'm like, well, I didn't let it ruin my show for 2.5 years, right? There's a lot of other people who let their anger for Donald Trump completely ruin their show for the last 2.5 years. Everyone at MSNBC, everyone at CNN, and half the people on YouTube. If not more. I would say probably 80% of the people on YouTube. have let their anger for Donald Trump ruin them, completely ruin their shows and ruin them. And here's one of them.
He is not a president. He is a puppet put in power by Vladimir Putin. And those who ignore these elemental existential facts, Democrats or Republicans, are traitors to this country and will immediately and forever after be held accountable.
Aaron, have you been held accountable yet?
You know, Jimmy, what I want to stress here is that the problem here, like when you talk about anger ruining people's shows, anger for Trump. See, the anger for Trump is obviously justified, right? But not only has this anger ruined people's reasoning skills, it's also ruined their ability to be an effective resistance to Donald Trump. So it's been it's an act of 100% self-sabotage, because for 2 years, people like Keith Olbermann and other prominent liberal pundits have directed us to resist Trump by believing in their conspiracy theory. And look at the result now. Now we've just handed Trump a massive gift heading into 2020. He'll claim vindication. He'll claim with some justification that this investigation was unfair. And there is actual grounds for that, because when you look at what it's based on, it's pretty baseless.
Well, 50%, there was a new poll recently, USA Today, 50% of the people believe that Trump is a victim of a witch hunt.
Exactly right. And the thing is, they're catching on. And part of that has to reflect the fact that after 2 years of hearing about Trump and his associates were guilty of all these crimes, there's nothing except for process crimes that result in a very small amount of prison time for the people who pled guilty. Or in the case of Manafort, the only person who faces serious prison time, it's for a case that has nothing to do with Russia or the 2016 election. So what I want people to really get, because I've been hearing today from people I respect about how challenging RussiaGate is a way of defending Trump. No, we're challenging the people who have been handing Trump a massive gift for his reelection campaign.
That is such a crazy assessment of what we're doing. So if you don't go along with unbelievable propaganda, you're somehow defending a politician. That is the most backwards, upside down, and the opposite of journalism. So when you say people you respect, I'm guessing you don't mean your dad, but you mean someone in freaking journalism. And so these people who consider themselves journalists, what I'm finding out for the little time I'm spending in this area is that they're horrible. That 99% of them suck worse than me and wouldn't know a fucking fact if it bit them in their conspiratorial ass. And the fact that I can get this right for 2.5 years when still to this day, people that you respect are saying that telling the truth is somehow a subversive act. That's, again, it reminds me of that thing that Ron Paul likes to say, when telling the truth becomes a crime, you're being ruled by criminals. And now we're also telling the truth is a revolutionary act. That's what we're living in. It's a ubiquitous lie. RussiaGate was nothing but a propaganda invented by the Hillary Clinton campaign, pushed by the intelligence community because it forwards their Cold War narrative. And now we have another Cold War. And guess what? We're spending $800 billion a year on bombs and missiles again. So everybody's happy. And guess what? Rachel Maddow has the #1 show on cable. So everybody's happy about this RussiaGate thing, except, you know who's not? 30 million Americans that don't have health care. 80% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck. That is who is not happy about RussiaGate. Now, I saw, unhinged people, I mean, to be able, so now when I'm out there telling the truth and I got to turn on the video and hear a jagoff like Keith Olbermann say something like this about me.
He is not a president. He is a puppet put in power by Vladimir Putin. And those who ignore these elemental existential facts, Democrats or Republicans, are traitors to this country and will immediately and forever after be held accountable.
That is so damaging to our country. That's worse than anything Trump has done. That's worse than anything Trump has done. And it just goes to show you that Keith Olbermann was all this time, he was Glenn Beck in a costume. That's Glenn Beck. So you know how when a black guy with a Muslim name got elected to the presidency, how a bunch of right-wingers' brains just got fried, like Sean Hannity, Donald Trump, Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck would have a chalkboard and tell you how the Muslims are taking over, even though Barack Obama wasn't a Muslim. And they would tell you how that's how fried their brain got, right? And then they chased him down for his long-form birth certificate, and now all of a sudden you go, oh my God, the left is just as bad as they are. In fact, fucking worse. They didn't call me a traitor to my country because I supported Barack Obama, but if they do say that now. Go ahead, Aaron.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, you and I share, I think, the same contempt for pundit hacks like Keith Olbermann. But sometimes we diverge in our assessment of their impact. And so I would not agree with you in saying that Keith Olbermann, what he does there is worse than anything that Trump has done, right? Because, Trump is the president who's done untold damage to people in this country and around the world. Keith Olbermann is just a hack who nobody should take seriously and who ultimately what he says is inconsequential. But I mean, overall, the media culture that he is a part of, I mean, we certainly agree. And you've been calling this out for 2 years, and I've tried to do my part too. The media culture that he's a part of, where this unhinged conspiracy theory has become the prevailing culture, has done serious damage, irreparable damage, turning liberals into Cold War dogma adhering, national security state worshiping, conspiracy theory peddling people. And it's again, there's so many negative consequences to it, including taking our eye off all the issues that you laid out, like healthcare. And now heading into 2020, giving Trump this massive victory to cling to and to cite. And, unless we wise up to that, unless we can let go, speaking of the broad liberal progressive spectrum, let go of this attachment to this conspiracy theory, I'm really worried about what that means for 2020.
In January 2017, we were saying, we've been saying this from the get-go, that this is going to come back to bite the left on the ass, and you got to be careful before you do this. Also, we also would say that, this is going to, people already have very little confidence in news journalism, especially after what they saw they did to Bernie Sanders, right? And then, and so now, half of the left hated the news media because they saw they were disingenuously and unfairly covering Bernie Sanders. If they weren't smearing him, they were ignoring him while they're showing empty Trump podiums, right? And now the other half of the country gets to see how the news media completely lied about Donald Trump and created a complete propaganda scare, and they created a new red scare. And so now there's absolutely no confidence in the news media on the left or the right. And so now when the news media actually does want to tell you something about Donald Trump, now people aren't going to believe them, and that's the big problem. And now nobody's going to believe. So when let me ask you this question, Aaron. When Nancy Pelosi says for 2.5 years that Donald Trump is being controlled by Vladimir Putin, very much like Keith Olbermann just said, in no uncertain terms, and then she says, I'm not going to push for impeachment, what that tells me is she never really believed he was a Putin puppet, because if you thought we had a traitor in the White House, you would do everything you could to get that guy out of power, wouldn't you?
I totally agree. It tells you that they did not take their wild claim seriously. It also tells me that they don't take being a serious opposition party seriously. Because if you were a serious opposition party, then why would you insist on an evidence-free narrative, prioritize that for 2 years, spread all kinds of innuendo and raise expectations amongst your base, only then knowing full well that there's no evidence for it, and then even when it collapses, doubling down on it. So last night I saw Adam Schiff, who's peddled the RussiaGate conspiracy theory more than probably anybody in Congress, talking about how Mueller might not have done a complete enough investigation, and how Congress needs to see all the evidence because there might be underlying evidence there of a compromised president. Well, if Mueller didn't allege a compromised president, how all of a sudden is the House going to be able to figure out that Trump is a compromised president based on the evidence that Mueller used? So it's like, that tells me that these people are more interested in protecting their own status, their own privilege, which they've done for 2 years, because if they were serious about actually challenging Trump, then they would have taken a look at what got Trump elected. And what got Trump elected was painting himself as a working class champion and conning enough people into believing that he would defend working people and take on Wall Street. But Democrats don't want to have to look at that because that would mean challenging their own relationship to Wall Street and rethinking that and coming up with a serious alternative to Trump's policies. But they haven't done that. So all this tells me that not only are these people conspiracy theorists, but they're not interested in being an actual effective opposition.
So now, can you tell me what? Now, I interpreted this as when Joy-Ann Reid says it feels like the seeds of a cover-up are here. To me, that sounds like Joy-Ann Reid is saying Trump is guilty of this criminal conspiracy that Mueller's been investigating, and somehow Mueller is in on this cover-up from the Justice Department. Is that what she's saying?
It's ludicrous, but it's not surprising. So for 2 years, we've heard so much about the need to protect Mueller and how Mueller has this unparalleled integrity, the integrity of a Marine. He's a soldier. He's just going to follow the facts. Now, all of a sudden, Mueller has delivered a report without indicting anybody for the Trump-Russia conspiracy that people like Joy Reid have been so convinced of. And now we're hearing about, was Mueller interfered with? This seems like a cover-up. Her reasons for that, if you watch the clip of it, she says that, Barr didn't recuse himself and Trump effectively controls the DOJ. That's her reason for it, which is just, it's ridiculous for so many reasons, including the fact that even Barr in his letter to Congress notes that the Justice Department never interfered with a single decision or track that Mueller wanted to pursue. So it's like even factually incorrect based on the information we got yesterday. And comparing it to the narrative we've heard about Mueller for 2 years, it's ridiculous. So now they're going to start throwing Mueller under the bus as well. And it shows just how pathetic and desperate they're getting to, instead of just acknowledging like, okay, this didn't work out the way we primed you to expect, let's move on now. They're doubling down with a new conspiracy theory to cover up for the failure of the old one.
So now you had a debate about this with Cenk Uygur, who has famously been, on board with Trump as a puppet of Putin. That's the narrative that they've told at the main show. It's not. We've told the opposite at the Aggressive Progressives on the same network. So tip of the hat to Cenk Uygur for having a show on his network that gets it right. No other news channel does. So I think I'm actually complimenting myself when I do that. I think that's what I'm really doing. But I saw that now you had a debate with him, and he has a different view of this. Can you explain quickly what it is, and did you have any effect on him, you think?
Well, first of all, tip of the hat also to Cenk for having me on, because so many other progressive outlets have just completely shut out debate. Right. You will never see. In
fact, I think I saw you tweet that the last time anybody on MSNBC had a counter view of the RussiaGate, when was that? Can you tell us?
It was December 2016, so before even Trump took office, and it was when Ari Melber interviewed Glenn Greenwald.
So Ari Melber interviews Glenn Greenwald, so no one will ever see that because it's on fucking Ari Melber's show, which no one watches.
Well,
and so
I'm not going to diss Ari, but I will say it's crazy that for all of Trump's presidency. Well, I will diss Ari for not having Glenn on since. Yeah. Because it's insane that for 2 years of Trump's presidency, you don't have one progressive critic of this dominant narrative and no one who can point out all the facts that your network has been ignoring and sidelining for 2 years. That is what is called state TV. In this case, it's state TV for the wing of the state known as the Democratic Party. But it's insane. And so credit to Cenk for having me on. I thought we had a very substantive discussion. I mean, I think Cenk's thing is that from the way I interpret it is that he doesn't think collusion happened during the 2016 campaign. He does, though, think that Trump is compromised by Putin because Putin has leverage over Trump via Russian money laundering, and so he can get Trump to do things that no other president would do. And he's suspicious because of things like Trump meeting with Putin privately and tearing up or reportedly tearing up the notes of that meeting from the translator afterwards. So I think that is the crux of. So
I always thought that was a killer argument that Cenk had. So Trump had a meeting with Putin, and they got rid of his own American interpreter, and so it looked like he wanted to talk to Putin without anybody and any records, and that does seem pretty. Then Cenk points to that, and he's like, "That's it. Why else would you want to do that if you're not doing some kind of criminal stuff?" And I was like, "That's pretty good." And then you pointed out in that conversation that, well, there's actually precedent for this, that Ronald Reagan, of all people, had secret meetings and told the press and his interpreters to get away. And him and Gorbachev had a meeting. And what we got out of that was a nuclear arms treaty. So good things come out of them meeting privately like that. So that point of Jenks, which I really did think that was a killer point for a long time until again, and then I double checked you, by the way. I looked that up to make sure that you weren't pulling that out of somewhere. And so you were right, 100%. I even read it in the LA Times. And in fact, the way the LA Times reported the private meeting between Gorbachev and Reagan was that it was a great thing. They never were suspicious of Ronald Reagan. They were just saying this is a great thing, and the pesky press had to get away. That's the way they couched it. So that point fell apart. And now his other thing was about the financial crimes. Jenks' opinion is that the Russian oligarchs are under the thumb of Putin, and Trump is under the thumb of Russian oligarchs. So ergo, he's one step removed from Putin. So he's underneath Putin's thumb because whatever Putin wants, the oligarchs do, and the oligarchs will make Trump do whatever they want because they're giving him money, right? So they parked money. All these Russian oligarchs parked money in his properties in Florida, but that also doesn't support that theory, right?
Right. I mean, there's a few things here. First of all, if Trump is under Putin's thumb, then why then is he pursuing policies that are more hawkish on Russia, far more hawkish on Russia than Barack Obama's? I mean, we don't accuse Obama of being compromised by Putin. You know, one illustration of that points to a very big irony when it comes to this issue of, the precedent for Russian and U.S. presidents meeting privately. One of the policies that Trump has pursued is tearing up the very nuclear arms control agreement that resulted from those private meetings between Reagan and Gorbachev, the INF Treaty, which is now giving us a new arms race. So great, and where is the resistance on that? Trump's trying to overthrow Putin's ally in Venezuela. He's bombed Syria, Russia's ally, twice. He's trying to stop a vital gas pipeline deal between Germany and Russia, even considering sanctions on that pipeline, which is like crazy and unprecedented. He's increased the number of U.S. troops at Russia's borders, held the biggest military war games ever on Russia's borders. So on and on and on and on. And nobody ever addresses that the sobering reality of what is actually going on, preferring instead to come up with fantasies about what they think is going on behind the scenes. And in terms of Russian money having leverage over Trump, I mean, like the sources for that are basically like literally a Gulf magazine writer says that, like, he said a few years after the fact, he said that in a conversation which he never reported previously, he said that Eric Trump told him that the Russians have a lot of money in Trump properties. Okay. So that's one source for that. And then there's also a comment by Donald Trump Jr. where he talks about how Russians have been buying up some of our properties. Okay. So like that is like the main source for all these claims about Russian money compromising Trump. And even if there is a disproportionate amount of Russian money being laundered through Trump properties, I mean, that's serious and worth looking at. But then how you get from that to Vladimir Putin and instructing Donald Trump what to do privately and making him do his bidding is just improbable, especially when you look at the fact that what Trump is actually doing consistently is endorsing and implementing a hawkish and dangerous posture towards Putin and Russia.
Yeah, so here here's Kyle Kalinske puts it this way: the Putin puppet narrative was always liberal Benghazi. Trump's own policies debunked it. What policies? Well, he armed the Ukrainian rebels. Russia didn't want that. He put a NATO buildup on the Russian border. Putin didn't want that. He put U.S. warships in the Black Sea. Putin certainly didn't want that. He's right now pressuring Germany to axe a Russian pipeline oil deal. Did you know that? Yeah, he's doing that. He pulled out of the nuke treaty. Russia didn't want that to happen. He's escalated in Syria, and he bombed Syria twice. And now he's trying to overthrow Maduro in Venezuela. Russia also doesn't want that. So that again, that's what a conspiracy theory is. When you start it at a conclusion that Trump is the Putin puppet, and then and then you go and you find evidence to back it up, and even evidence that would debunk your theory, you twist it to fit your theory. It's called an unfalsifiable theory, right? And that's
you ignore it,
and so
or you ignore the countervailing evidence, which is why we don't see on CNN or MSNBC any segments about all these serious issues. Like, look at that list of things that Kyle has there, all these serious issues that are going on in the world. We don't even talk about them, partly because they undermine that conspiracy theory that liberal media culture, unfortunately, is so attached to. And, part of it could not exist, I think, if this were about any other country, I don't think it could sustain itself. But unfortunately, in the U.S., there is a Russophobia that goes way back, far before 2016. It's sort of in our DNA, where back in the early 20th century, there was talk about Russian infiltration and Russia influencing the minds of vulnerable Americans, and that narrative has been used to sustain a dangerous Cold War that threatened extinction for the world, but was very profitable for the military-industrial complex. And now RussiaGate has basically taken that, rebranded it into this false idea of it being used to take on Donald Trump, when really, as we've been talking about, it's actually empowered Donald Trump and made the world much more dangerous.
So here's Chomsky speaking to this point of there has to be so Trump is under the thumb of the Russian oligarchs and Putin, so there must be a quid pro quo, right? So they're doing something for Trump, so Trump has to do something for them, right? And Chomsky says this. Where is it? Watch.
But with a quid pro quo of the Russians helping.
Of what? The quid pro quo is that he's increased military action on the Russian border. He's created a huge military expansion of the military budget aimed at Russia. He's pulled out of the INF Treaty, which is a major threat to Russia. What's the quid pro quo?
So that would, to me, debunk this other theory of Jenks that Trump is economic puppet of Putin. Would that do it for you?
No one says it like Chomsky. What's the quid pro quo?
What is it? So here, we'll play a little bit more Chomsky. Here he is talking about the crazy amount of focus that the U.S. media has given to this RussiaGate narrative. And listen, he uses a funny word at the beginning. Watch.
There's a focus on what I believe are marginalia.
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 Boy, I had to get some cream for my marginalia last week. I had a rash. Did you see? I don't know about that. Anyway, I had my marginalia out in public. I got arrested. Did you know that? If you do that. Anyway, so we've been focused on marginalia. I wonder if his marginalia is circumcised. Anyway, here we go.
Take, say, the huge issue of interference in our pristine elections. Did the Russians interfere in our elections? An issue of overwhelming concern in the media. I mean, in most of the world, that's almost a joke. First of all, if you're interested in foreign interference in our elections, whatever the Russians may have done barely counts weighs in the balance as compared with what another state does openly, brazenly, and with enormous support. Israeli intervention in U.S. elections vastly overwhelms anything the Russians may have done.
So there you have it again. That just shows you that this is propaganda, that Adam Schiff, Rachel Maddow, Jake Tapper, they're all pushing complete 100% propaganda, because if you really cared about our pristine elections and undue foreign influence, you'd be screaming bloody murder about Israeli influence in our government, but they're not. So that, again, reveals them to be frauds. They're frauds, okay? So there's no two ways about it. Now, Aaron's not going to say that because he has to work with these people the rest of his life, but I'm going to say it. They're frauds. The people who've been pushing this stuff are frauds, which is why people have such little faith in our news media today, which is also why I can consistently do a better job than they do. What does that tell you? That I'm doing a better job than they do? Jesus Christ, do you understand how bad they are? And I'm not kidding. I'm doing a much better. We got the Syria war right. They got it wrong. Venezuela, they're all getting it wrong 100%. Even on YouTube, they're all getting it wrong almost 100%. And RussiaGate, we've been pushing back 2.5 years against this. It's almost unbelievable that we've gotten this right here at our little stupid show in my garage. And I mean, look at all the money at these beautiful these studios people have. People have millions of dollars in their studios, and what? So they can have prettier lights while they gaslight you and push propaganda from the government. That's what's happening. And Chomsky just revealed that. If you really give a shit about our elections and their integrity, you wouldn't be looking at Russia. Well, here's another one. Here's something else he says. Let's listen.
If concerned with our elections and how they operate and how they relate to what would happen in a democratic society, taking a look at Russian hacking is absolutely the wrong place to look.
So just let me get you to react to that, Aaron. Now, how are you gonna? No, how do you react to that when you hear him say that?
Well, look, I mean, I pretty much reflexively agree with whatever Chomsky says, but in this case, I all the more agree. I mean, he's talking about all the issues that are serious threats to democracy in this country that have been ignored by RussiaGate. I mean, like, look at the 2016 election. You can sort of chart the Trump's victory and the Republican victories to a key influx of dark money, and of course, gerrymandering, voter suppression. I mean, all these things. Add them up all together, and none of them have received a fraction of the attention that RussiaGate has got. You know, and the reason why is because taking on those issues seriously would mean seriously taking on the U.S. elites that profit from them, that profit from, you know, a system that allows for dark money and corporate control of media and politics. But none of these, unfortunately, none of these self-styled the bold thinking, independent-minded journalists who have big platforms like on MSNBC want to actually do that. Their only option from the left to oppose Trump has been through a conspiracy theory that really threatens nobody. And in fact, it benefits privileged sectors, because if you drum up tensions with Russia, that's going to be profitable to industries that profit from tensions with Russia. So it's a very safe way to resist. And we're feeling now the disaster. And I just want to stress again that for us to challenge that is not to support Trump. It's to say that we need to challenge Trump based on what Trump is actually doing, not on this invented conspiracy theory.
Now, since this show has gotten this right and we've gotten Venezuela right and the word has gotten out, now my phone has been ringing off the hook. Everyone wants to hire me. Now, I bet you're in demand, too, because you've been way out in front. You've been famously out in front on this, and you've been getting derision, and you've been getting derided, and other words that start with derid. So are people calling you up right now? They want to get this kind of good investigative reporting on their platforms?
Not yet.
No kidding.
Not yet.
Wow, that's weird. So I guess you'll be having a drink with Phil Donahue later on and Ashley Banfield?
Yeah, Phil, as you talked about a lot, was taken off the air before the Iraq War for challenging it. And MSNBC said in a memo that, you know, that's having someone who questions the U.S. government's drive to war right now it's just not good for our network. It's not the kind of image we want to cultivate. So there we go. Those are the results for people who get it right. People get it wrong, as we saw with the Iraq War, are kicked upstairs. You know, Jeffrey Goldberg, who gave us the notion that Al Qaeda was working with Saddam and that Saddam had WMDs. He's not the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. And David Frum,
who invented the term "axis of evil," he's also an editor at The Atlantic, right?
Jonathan Chait,
the worst.
Who supported the Iraq War, supported the war in Libya.
And didn't apologize for it until 2012, by the way. Jonathan Chait didn't apologize for supporting the Iraq War until 2012.
There we go. And now, during the Trump-Russia era, has distinguished himself by writing an article wondering if Trump has been a Russian intelligence asset since 1987.
And these guys don't get fired. They never get fired. Dave Weigel's never going to write an article about what a shithead Jonathan Chait is and what a conspiracy theorist is, because they all are. Every writer at the Washington Post and every writer, they're all goddamn conspiracy theorists. And it's just so fun. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead.
Well, just to say, there was recently a round of layoffs at New York Magazine where Chait writes. Chait was not included in those layoffs. There was recently a huge round of layoffs at BuzzFeed News. BuzzFeed, which has actually done some very good reporting, but not included in those layoffs were the people who gave us this now debunked story about Trump ordering Michael Cohen to lie to Congress.
They kept those guys?
They kept those guys, and it just came out recently that BuzzFeed paid at least $4.5 million in a lawsuit to defend itself against defamation after it published the phony Steele dossier, this bullshit thing paid for by the Democrats that alleged a grand Trump-Russia conspiracy theory. BuzzFeed published it. They were sued for defamation by some people who were named in that dossier. And BuzzFeed spent at least $4.5 million to hire experts to try to corroborate that dossier, which of course they couldn't. So that is where right now, that's a small window into where journalism, money, and resources are going to, and who is getting kicked upstairs and who's getting left out by it. And
so BuzzFeed most recently famously printed a completely bogus article that we debunked here. That's another thing we got right. So we got, and also the bullshit Manafort meeting with Julian Assange. We also debunked that. It's amazing all the things we get right at Aggressive Progressives in the Jimmy Dore Show that they don't get right anywhere else. It's amazing how is it that I can get that right? That is just a mind-blowing thing that BuzzFeed didn't. By the way, they still lived that story up, and the story was that Trump ordered Cohen to lie to Congress, and they ran with that story, and they said it was real, and that, of course, is 100% a false story, and they're standing by a false story, but their Facebook page is not going to be taken down, nor will they be taken off of Twitter. So this just goes to show you, when you lie for the establishment, there's never a price to pay, ever. If you tell the truth, an uncomfortable truth about the establishment, you'll be deplatformed, and that's what's been happening to people on the left. And I understand people on the right, too. I'm not that into it, but I hear Tim Pool has told me. Let me play one more clip from Chomsky here. Let me play one more clip. Here we go.
That for a long period, way back, U.S. elections have been pretty much bought. You can predict the outcome of a presidential or congressional election with remarkable precision, simply by looking at campaign spending.
So if you want to know what influences our elections, look at that's the money. Our elections are bought. And all the Democrats are running around. Our democracy has been hijacked. Our democracy was hijacked in 1977 or whatever that goddamn ruling that opened up the floodgates of unlimited money in politics. That's what we're living in. We don't, again, I saw Zephyr Teachout tweeted out, we need to have functional political parties. She's really working to make the Democratic Party a functional political party, even though she just found out that the DCCC is now doing economic terrorism against any progressive who primaries a corporatist Democrat. That's a new story we're reporting. They said if you're a consultant and you work with someone who primaries a corporate Democrat, the DCCC will then never give you another contract, which is effectively a death sentence for a political consultant. So they're still doing it to Chomsky. They're still doing it to the progressives. I just want to say thanks for you tweeting this out, Aaron. Jimmy deserves a ton of credit. He used his platform to consistently and effectively debunk the RussiaGate madness while others in the progressive field drank the Kool-Aid. I'm grateful to him for that and for giving me an opportunity to be a frequent guest. Well, thank you for tweeting that out. That was really nice. And why did you put consistently in with little asterisks?
Well, there are some places that did it for a bit, but then got, I think.
Oh, I think I know what you mean by that now.
Democracy Now!, The Intercept, that have had some people that push back, but have also featured a lot of voices who drank the Kool-Aid as well. And I think there's been an overall cowardice in leftist media circles to really take this on, not because I think they have a lack of integrity, but I think that Trump really just skewed people's thinking, and they couldn't see that actually challenging this conspiracy theory was not helping. That challenging this conspiracy theory was not a way of helping Trump. It was actually a way to help to challenge something that was doing serious damage to the efforts to take on Trump. And I think a lot of people lost sight of that because of the overall just confusion that Trump's presidency engendered, because for a lot of people it was a very disorienting and traumatizing experience.
I just have a hard time believing that people like Ari Melber and Chris Hayes really believe this the whole time. Like I just don't think that they believed it for even a second, and I just think that they're just go along tools. They're beards of a nefarious corporation, and that's why they got hired. And if they weren't willing to go along with that kind of dog shit, they wouldn't have got hired in the first place, or they would have got fired quick, like Cenk Uygur or Ed Schultz or Phil Donahue or Ashley Banfield or Jesse Ventura, or So that's. I really feel sorry for you, Aaron, that you have to work in this profession for the rest of your life. I really do. Honest to God, like if every fucking comedian was an ass, I was like, that's the beauty about comedy. I get to hang out with other comedians. I love it, right? They're my favorite people to hang out with. But these journalists, they're all fucking career climber jagoffs who don't give a fuck about journalism, and they have no trouble smearing somebody, and they won't even stand up for Julian Assange, somebody in their own goddamn profession, but they will stand up for a jackass like Jim Acosta. I mean, I got zero fucking respect for the entire profession. And so I just wish you good luck, honest to God. And right now the Washington Post is lying about Venezuela. Fucking CNN is lying about Venezuela. MSNBC, they're all getting it wrong. They're all still fucking getting this wrong. It's amazing how shitty they are. And I just want to say thank you to them, because it's helped my show immensely. We just crossed 500,000 subscribers. And, you'd think that MSNBC, Ari Melber would want to have me on or have you on, somebody who's been famously out front sticking our chin out on this and getting it kicked in. And now we're fucking right. And guys like Ari Melber and Chris Hayes and, of course, Rachel Maddow, who's completely fucking batshit crazy, won't have us on for a second, right? Because that would show that they have integrity. And even if they had integrity, their bosses don't, and they could never push back against their boss, which means fucking they don't have integrity. And so I've got way more integrity than those pieces of it over at MSNBC and CNN, and I'm fucking better than they are. You know why? I'm just not bought. That's why, because I'm not funded by the people I'm supposed to be exposing. You stupid son of a bitches. You fucking losers. A guy like me who smokes pot when he gets up in the morning has fucking scooped you for 2.5 years. You can all... Oh, feels good. Feels good. Aaron, I'll edit out the swears so you can throw it to your journalist friends. Don't worry about it. We're announcing our live dates for 2019. We're going to Ventura, California, Hermosa Beach, California, Tempe, Arizona, Austin, Texas, Chicago, Portland, all over the country. Go to JimmyDoreComedy.com for a link for tickets. If you'd like to support the show, please join our Patreon or premium membership. We give you hours of bonus content every week. And remember, if you think you're subscribed, you might not be. Check to make sure you're subscribed and click the bell so you get a notice every time we drop a clip. Thanks for your support.